What happens when a culture built on fixing everything meets civilizations that weren't broken? This isn't just a theoretical question. It's the unspoken curriculum of global travel, playing out in teahouses, market squares, and mountain villages from Kyoto to Marrakesh. I watched it unfold in a Kyoto teahouse, where ancient tradition meets the modern world's impatience. A traveler from Texas leaned across the polished wood counter, pointing at the bamboo matcha whisk with its delicate, hand-carved tines. "You know," he said with generous, well-meaning enthusiasm, "back home, we'd just throw this in a blender. Way faster, same result." The tea master, a man whose movements seemed to flow from some deeper well of time, didn't frown. He didn't argue or correct. He simply bowed. A gesture so refined it felt less like movement and more like geometry angles of respect carved from generations of practice. "Speed is one path," he said softly, his voice barely rising above the rustle of his silk kimono. "This is another." He then began what I would later learn was an 11-step ceremony. Each motion was precise, intentional, stripped of anything unnecessary. He measured the vivid green powder not with a scoop but with a bamboo spoon, tapping it exactly 3 times to level it. He poured the hot water not from a kettle but from a long-spouted vessel that looked centuries old. And then he whisked, not with frantic energy, but with a focused, circular motion that created not just foam, but something like a meditation made visible. The American watched. His initial smirk, that confident expression we wear when we're sure we know a better way, beginning to dissolve. First into curiosity, then into something approaching awe. By the time the tea master presented the bowl with both hands, a perfect emerald lake topped with fine froth, the traveler's posture had changed. He'd stopped leaning forward, stopped projecting. He received the bowl as one might receive a sacrament. He took a sip. He didn't speak. He didn't offer commentary or comparison to what they do back home. Simply drank, and in his silence was a whole conversation. He'd arrived as a teacher of efficiency. He left as a student of presence. In that quiet Kyoto room, 2 definitions of progress had met. And the louder one had learned to listen. This wasn't an isolated incident. Once I recognized the pattern, I began seeing it everywhere. Quiet cultural conversation happening at the edges of tourism and commerce. In places where American ingenuity meets what might be called rooted intelligence. Our culture, specifically the mainstream American mindset, exported through business. Media and tourism is engineered around a powerful, compelling narrative. See a problem, engineer a solution, deploy it at scale. It's a mindset responsible for magnificent achievements. It put humans on the moon, connected the world through the internet, and developed vaccines at speeds previously unimaginable. This fix-it mentality isn't just a habit. It's a worldview, an orientation toward existence that says everything can be improved, optimized, upgraded. But this worldview carries a subtle, significant blind spot. The assumption that everything is, in fact, a problem waiting for our particular solution. What I began to notice, from Italy to Thailand, from Egypt to Portugal, was that many cultures aren't operating from a problem-solution framework at all. They're operating from something else entirely, from frameworks of balance, essence, rhythm, and sufficiency. Take food, which we imagine as a universal language. In a small Roman pizzeria, the kind where the oven has been burning for 50 years and the tiles are stained with generations of smoke, I heard a diner make a suggestion. "You know what would be amazing?" he said to the pizzaiolo. "If you did a stuffed crust. You could charge more." "It's a value add," the pizzaiolo, a man whose forearms were dusted with flour like the ash of Vesuvius on an ancient statue, paused in his dough stretching. He looked at his oven, then at the customer, then back at his hands. "The value," he said slowly, as if translating a difficult concept, "is in what we leave out." He then slid a perfect margarita across the marble counter. No stuffed crust. No value-add toppings. Just the holy trinity of Neapolitan pizza: flour, tomato, mozzarella di bufala, basil. An edible lesson in minimalism. The customer, to his credit, took a bite. He chewed slowly. His eyebrows, which had been raised in skeptical challenge, relaxed. He nodded, not at the pizzaolo, but at the pizza itself, as if acknowledging something. Some truths, it turns out, don't need improving. They just need tasting. They need the space to be themselves without our additions and modifications. The perfection was in the restraint. In the centuries of knowing exactly when to stop, this collision extends to our very relationship with time. On the Amalfi Coast, where cliffs meet sea in a dramatic embrace of geology, I overheard a conversation between a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and a local fisherman. The entrepreneur, watching the fisherman mend a net with painstaking, hand-tying knots, couldn't contain himself. "You could automate this," he said, not unkindly. "Design a machine that does the knots. You could scale the process, be done in an hour instead of all day." The fisherman, his hands moving with the unthinking rhythm of a heartbeat, smiled without looking up. "And then, what would I do with the other 23? The American blinked. The equation didn't compute. In his world, productivity was the goal, maximizing output per unit of time. But for the fisherman, the rhythm of the work was the point. The slow, repetitive motion of tying knots wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a meditation, a way of being in the world. The net wasn't just a tool. It was an extension of his body and his daily rhythm. The time spent wasn't wasted. It was invested in a particular quality of experience. We chase efficiency to save time. Other cultures often master rhythm to savor time. One approach sees time as a container to fill. The other sees it as a current to float in. Perhaps nowhere is this cultural mismatch more potentially dangerous than how we interact with the natural world. On a safari in Botswana's Okavango Delta, I witnessed a confrontation between technology and instinct. A young tourist, smartphone in hand, was arguing with his guide. "The app," he said, pointing to a blinking dot on a digital map, "says the elephant herd should be congregating east of here, near this water source. Your instinct is just unscientific guesswork." The guide? A man whose face was a topographic map of sun and wind lines, whose eyes seemed to see frequencies of light invisible to the rest of us, simply nodded. "Then you lead," he said softly. What followed was 20 minutes of futile struggle. They pushed through thorny brush that tore at their clothing, followed the blinking dot that seemed to jump and recalibrate with each step. The air grew still and heavy. And then, from precisely the direction the guide had originally pointed west, not east, came a low, rumbling roar that vibrated in the chest before it reached the ears. Silence fell, deeper than before. The app's data was technically correct about historical migration patterns. What it couldn't account for what the guide's 30 years of living on that land had taught him was that a prolonged drought had shifted the water table. The elephants weren't following last year's map. They were following this week's water. The guide's guesswork was actually a sophisticated reading of context, the direction of the morning wind carrying scent, the particular alarm calls of birds 30 minutes earlier. The recent tracks not yet logged in any database technology offers data. Wisdom reads context. The tourist put his phone away, his confidence momentarily silenced. Some signals, the most important ones, don't require a satellite or an algorithm. They require presence, attention, and the humility to recognize that not all knowledge can be digitized. Even our relationship with the past gets quietly corrected. Outside the Great Pyramid of Giza, I listened as a man enthusiastically explained his theory about ancient advanced technology, lost civilizations, and cosmic interventions. Say anything, it seemed. but the actual human hands that built the monuments before him. His Egyptian guide, a patient man with kind eyes, listened to the entire elaborate theory. Then he gestured to an elderly man sitting in the shade nearby, slowly carving a piece of limestone with tools that looked unchanged for millennia. "My grandfather," the guide said simply. He worked on the restoration of the Sphinx's paws in the 1980s. No lasers. No alien technology. Just these hands and patience measured in lifetimes. The tourist's complex theory crumbled in the face of this living, breathing continuity. We often look for dramatic secrets, hidden technologies, lost civilizations, cosmic interventions. Sometimes the answer is simpler and more profound: extraordinary human dedication across generations. The mystery isn't always in how they did it with advanced tools. Sometimes the mystery is in how they did it with simple ones, applied with unimaginable perseverance. So why does this pattern repeat itself across continents and contexts? It's not about intelligence, not in any meaningful sense of the word. The American tourist, the Silicon Valley entrepreneur, the well-meaning traveler, they're often highly intelligent by conventional metrics. The difference is more fundamental. It's about core cultural programming. American culture, particularly in its mainstream exported form, runs on what we might call solution-seeking software. Its basic operating question is, how can this be made better, faster, more efficient? It's a mindset of magnificent agency, of empowerment. But like any powerful tool, it has a specific application. The blind spot emerges when this tool is applied to contexts where the fundamental question isn't how can this be improved, but why would this need improving? What we encounter abroad often isn't a lack of innovation, but a different definition of progress altogether. In a Portuguese village known for its pottery, I asked a ceramicist why she continued to use a traditional wood-fired kiln when modern electric kilns offered perfectly controlled, consistent temperatures. "Look," she said, holding up a vase. The glaze had run in unique, unpredictable rivulets, creating a pattern that looked like a frozen river viewed from space. "With your electric kiln," she said, "every piece comes out the same, perfect, identical. With my kiln, the fire decides. This streak here," she pointed to a particularly beautiful blue bleed into the brown. "This is where the flame kissed it a moment longer. The fire's inconsistency," she smiled, "is where the soul lives." For her, perfection wasn't uniformity, was character. The flaws, the variations, weren't mistakes to be eliminated. They were the signature of the process, the story told in clay and glaze. We seek to control variables to eliminate unpredictability. Other cultures often learn to collaborate with variables, to see them not as enemies of perfection, but as partners in creating uniqueness. This different valuation system extends to commerce. In the echoing vaults of Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, I watched a shopper try to aggressively haggle over a magnificent, hand-woven rug. "I've seen similar ones online for half this price," he declared, holding up his phone as evidence. The merchant, sipping from a small glass of sweet tea, didn't become defensive. He didn't lower his price immediately. He simply said, "The price you see online is for the object. The price I ask is for the story. Which would you like to buy?" He then explained, this particular pattern was specific to his village, passed down through his wife's family. The wool came from sheep raised in a particular valley. The red dye was made from madder root harvested at a specific moon phase. The weaving had taken his wife and her sisters 8 months, working in the evenings after other chores. It wasn't a rug. It was a portable heirloom, a repository of time, place, and relationship. The transaction stalled, not over price, but over fundamental misunderstanding. The American wanted a product, a decorative item with certain dimensions and colors. The merchant was selling a lineage. We often mistake the artifact for the art, sometimes. The real value, the story, the connection. The meaning is completely invisible to an efficiency spreadsheet. Then there's what might be the ultimate lesson, the one that challenges the most basic assumption of growth-oriented cultures, the wisdom of enough. On a small Greek island, I watched a man try to convince a local taverna owner to think bigger. You should expand. Open another location in Athens. Franchise this concept. You could build an empire. The owner, an older man with eyes that had watched countless sunsets over that particular bay, leaning against his whitewashed wall. The evening light was painting everything in shades of gold and orange. He laughed, a sound like stones tumbling in water. "I have an empire," he said, sweeping his hand not toward his modest dozen tables, but toward the sea, the sky, the village, the whole shimmering scene. It opens at dawn and closes when the last story is told at night. What more should it conquer? The American was speechless. His entire framework, growth, scale, expansion, market capture, met a philosophy of sufficiency. One measures success in units sold, revenue growth, market share. The other measures it in sunsets enjoyed, stories exchanged, a life in balance with a place. We build to accumulate. Others build to belong. This reflection isn't about declaring one approach superior. The American fix-it drive has undeniably brought tremendous benefits to humanity. The danger isn't in the mindset itself, but in its universalization, the unconscious assumption that our tools, our metrics, our definitions of progress are the right ones for every context, the real skill of the global citizen. The mark of true cultural intelligence isn't in applying your solution everywhere you go. It's in the humility to pause and ask a different question first. Is this actually a problem here? Or even more fundamentally, through what lens is this being viewed, and is that lens appropriate to this context? Consider the Spanish siesta. To a productivity-obsessed culture, it looks like wasted work hours, inefficiency. But through a different lens, its productivity isn't economic highs, cultural, social, metabolic. It produces cohesive families, lower stress, better health, and longer, more social evenings. The value is real, just measured in different currency. Or consider Swiss train schedules. The infamous precision might seem inflexible, even rigid, to someone used to more adaptable systems. But that precision creates something profound: societal trust. When the entire country knows the 804 will arrive at 804, it enables a different kind of planning, reliability, and social coordination. The inflexibility isn't a limitation. It's the foundation of a social contract. We tend to see the surface action, the nap, the exact timetable, and judge it by our familiar metrics. We often miss the deeper ecosystem it supports, the different values it serves, this journey from thinking we have the answers to realizing we've been asking the wrong questions is the unspoken, transformative curriculum of meaningful travel. The most valuable souvenirs aren't objects in your suitcase. They're these subtle perspective shifts that settle in your mind. It's the Italian grandmother who shows you that slow food isn't a trendy restaurant concept. It's just food. It's the way it's always been done, not as a statement, but as a simple fact of good living. It's the Japanese gardener for whom a single perfectly placed rock in a sea of raked gravel holds more meaning, more universe, than an entire field of flowers could. It's the Balinese farmer who measures his wealth not in the size of his harvest or the balance in his bank account, but in the number of temple ceremonies he can attend and contribute to wealth as participation, not possession. So what do we take from all these gentle global corrections? Not that we should abandon our drive to innovate and improve. Not that other cultures have all the answers. But this: the world isn't a series of puzzles waiting for our particular solutions. It's something richer and more interesting, a complex, living library of ways to be human. Our cultural strength often lies in action, in doing, in making new. There's often lies in absorption, in being, in understanding why the old still works. Our genius is often in invention. Theirs is often in preservation, not as stagnation, but as deep sustainability. The most advanced skill we can develop in our interconnected world might be this: before we rush to upgrade, disrupt, or optimize a tradition, a practice, or a rhythm we've just encountered, we first learn its language. Not to necessarily adopt it, but to understand its internal logic, to appreciate what values it serves, what needs it meets, what balance it maintains. The goal isn't to stop innovating. It's to realize that true innovation isn't always additive. Sometimes, the most sophisticated move is to recognize a masterpiece. If it's a ceramic vase, a daily rhythm, or a centuries-old food tradition, and simply appreciate it. To understand that not every silence needs filling with sound, not every process needs speeding up, and not every ancient way is secretly waiting for our modern fix. Sometimes, the thing that needs fixing isn't out there in the world. It's in our assumption that everything needs our fixing. And that might be the quietest, most profound lesson the world has to teach those willing to listen.